Hi everybody, Dr. Jay Brower here to talk with you about uncertainty reduction theory. Uncertainty reduction theory shares some important features in common with cognitive dissonance theory. And primarily that has to do with talking about a fundamental human experience like dissonance, but in this case uncertainty, which creates an aversive state. It represents something that we want to try and do away with and replace with certainty or consonance in the case of cognitive dissonance theory. All right, so the big question of uncertainty reduction theory is how well do we tolerate uncertainty about other people? And do we try to reduce uncertainty as a result? And the question to that, or the answer, excuse me, to that question is yes, we do. Some of the ways that we do it, we can think about what question we first try and answer about somebody when we first meet them. And some of those questions that we might try and answer would be something like, what kind of work does this person do? How do they know the person whose house this is? Who might we know in common? What part of town are they from? Or in the case of college students, what dorm do they live in? And so what these questions try and get at is reducing uncertainty about who this person is and where they fit into our spectrum of life. How close are they to me? And this provides us potentially important information about that gives us an understanding of how to relate to them. Some additional questions that we might think about in this process is what might lead us to be uncertain about others in the first place? And so, what might we try and become more certain about? Along with that, how do we attempt to resolve that uncertainty? Certainly, the first questions that I posed related to the first bullet there about questions we try and resolve to begin with. But we have to think about this in terms of a cycle, and that is to say that once uncertainty is reduced at first, we go through a cycle of decreasing uncertainty and then uncertainty's reappearance, and then uncertainty, and then moving towards certainty, and then more uncertainty. It's something that we don't ever entirely resolve in any way, shape, or form. So thinking about uncertainty reduction theory here as an overview. First, it assumes that communication is used to reduce the level of uncertainty. So when we're uncertain about others, about how they fit into our lives, about what their intentions might be, we use communication to reduce that uncertainty. And this includes the full spectrum of communicative behaviors, from linguistic communication to nonverbal communication, all of the tools and aspects, dimensions of communication that fit into those two very broad categories. A second component is that uncertainty is fundamentally uncomfortable. Just as we talked about with cognitive dissonance theory, uncertainty is an aversive state, something we want to avoid, something that causes us a level of distress. And so reducing uncertainty is a movement towards comfort. Third, people strive to reduce uncertainty. We're going to actively work to reduce uncertainty as much as possible. And those questions that I offered related to the first slide, I think point in their just everydayness and their regularity to just how much we devote our time and attention to reducing uncertainty with others. And then fourth, individuals make predictions in order to explain the outcomes of an interaction. So we make predictions about who this person is, about what their intentions are, about how they relate to me, about what we imagine their lives to be outside of a given interaction as a way of explaining the outcome. Oh, that person was biased against me to begin with. Oh, we're good friends. This is why this happened. Those kinds of things. All right, so some types of uncertainty. There is behavioral uncertainty and cognitive uncertainty. Behavioral uncertainty is when we are trying to make sense of the actions that we see others produce. And cognitive uncertainty is the kind of uncertainty that arises in our own thinking as we try and relate to other people prior to any substantive observations. And uncertainty reduction has both a proactive and retroactive process. So a proactive process is to in the moment, in an interaction, reduce uncertainty through asking questions, through analyzing behavior. And the retroactive process is thinking back to the past. So after an interaction is complete, how do we make sense of that? What do we think happened and why? And so it has that retroactive aspect. All right, so some important concepts related to uncertainty reduction. First is verbal output. These are the words we use in order to construct images and ask questions. Second, nonverbal warmth. So, this would be the degree of openness, essentially, of someone's body language, of their gestures, but also their paralinguistic behavior. And so this has to do with the sound or acoustic related elements of speech. So the tone, the rate, those kinds of things. Also, information seeking. So, how much do we attempt to ask questions? How much does the other person attempt to ask questions that seek out information about us? Self disclosure, which is how much we disclose about our personal background, facts about our lives, and then we drive or strive for reciprocity of disclosure. So, if I ask you, for instance, what do you do for a living? The natural expectation is to either be asked and be ready to answer that question myself or to offer that information after I ask it. So you say to me, oh, I'm a college student, and then my natural fill in terms of reciprocating in disclosure is to offer you an explanation of what I do. And then we have similarity, which is pretty self explanatory in terms of being able to see connections between ourselves and others. And then also liking. And liking is an attribute that plays out in a number of different facets, but has to do with essentially what it sounds like, trying to make sense of a connection that we might feel in an affinitive way with somebody else. All right, some assumptions of uncertainty reduction theory. First, people experience uncertainty in interpersonal settings. Naturally true. This leads some to avoid settings where they have to interact to a high degree with others. In some ways, you could say that the experience of uncertainty in interpersonal settings is why some people don't like calling, say, a place of business or a government office, because it invites an experience of uncertainty about how to act. Second, uncertainty is an aversive state. It generates cognitive stress, and so it's something that we tend to avoid. And then third, when strangers meet, their primary concern is to reduce uncertainty. So before any business can transpire, some uncertainty has to be reduced, and that can be either through our perceptions just to begin with. It can be through a questioning process where our further perceptions are generated. It happens in multiple forms. All right, so some questions to think about related to to uncertainty reduction theory. First, how do you try to reduce uncertainty in texting conversations? It's a very interesting question related to media technology. Second, how do you try to reduce uncertainty in conversations through social media? So, building off of the question related to text messaging, when you're, say, conversing with somebody on Facebook, do you, say, experience a different level of uncertainty in talking with somebody on their wall out in public space, or do you reduce uncertainty through specific question asking through direct messaging? And then to think about how that plays out across a number of different kinds of social media platforms. And then third, how do you try to reduce uncertainty in face-to-face interactions? And important to this is how might your strategies differ, or how do they differ between these three different experiences of dealing with interpersonal communication?